And we're back. September 1st, 1939. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so now Dunkirk is evacuated June 4th of 1940. Let me just move on. And France then surrenders pretty much shortly afterwards. Again, you can see some tearful people in France, and there's Hitler standing in Paris, victorious. Now, France, as I alluded to earlier, becomes divided, and German-occupied France is ruled by the Vichy government, by Henri Pétain. Check out my cool pronunciation. Now, the French resistance is led by Charles de Gaulle. You can see the insignia for the Free French, and then you have the resistance fighters, the Maquis. Now, besides this very small French resistance, all you have really left is Britain, because remember, right now, at this point in the war, Russia is neutral because they signed that secret Nazi-Soviet pact. Hitler will, of course, violate that later, bringing Russia into the war, but right now it's Great Britain against the war machine that is Germany. Now, the U.S. helped economically, but at this point will refuse still to help militarily. Lend-Lease was sort of sending money to, basically like the enemies, if you will, of Germany, of the Central Power, to the tune of $48 trillion. And then, of course, they expected to get that money back with interest. In fact, that's one of the reasons that the U.S. does so well after World War II, is we get money back from the people we helped out economically. Now, the Battle of Britain becomes pretty huge. The Battle of Britain was when the Luftwaffe, which was the Nazi Air Force, pretty much just bombed Britain to pebbles in a blitz attack, a lightning-quick attack. You can see people hiding in underground tunnels. You can see the wreckage. People hid in the subway. Oh, what did I miss something good here? Oh, yeah, the air raid shelters were pretty much the subway. Now, the RAF, the Royal Air Force, came out to sort of defend London and was victorious in saving London from total destruction. Let me just back up really quickly if I can. This is the current British Prime Minister who replaced Neville Chamberlain was Winston Churchill. He's perhaps one of the greatest people of the 20th century. We'll talk about him a great deal more in chapter 30. You can see some war propaganda from Britain. Never was so much owed by so many to so few, which is one of Winston Churchill's greatest quotes. He's a very quotable guy. Let us go forward together. I have like a whole page of quotes by Winston Churchill we can take a look at in class. It's pretty cool. Now, Roosevelt and Churchill signed a treaty of friendship called the Atlantic Charter in August of 1941. You should know from, just recently, December 7th, 1941 is when Pearl Harbor is bombed. So at this point, the U.S. is still neutral militarily. However, we are now in a solid alliance with Great Britain, and it calls for basically, like a League of Nations, like we need to have some diplomacy and settle all this craziness. All right. This leads up to Operation Barbarossa, which is aptly called Hitler's biggest mistake. Just like Napoleon arrogantly invaded Russia during the Napoleonic Wars, was in 1812, Hitler almost, 130 years later, will invade Russia also to his great detriment in 1941. He, very Machiavellian, he decides at this point he's confident enough that he'll soon have defeated Britain. France poses no threat at all. The U.S. is completely staying out of the war. Essentially, Germany is fighting a one-front war if he goes into Russia. Now, Germany, of course, Hitler's goal is worldwide domination, so now seemed like as good a time as any to take out the commies in Russia. So, Operation Barbarossa, he invaded in June, just like Napoleon. There were 3 million German soldiers and 3,400 tanks. This will, of course, bring Stalin into the war, and now we have the big three. Churchill, Roosevelt, who we're not militarily in the war yet, but we will be, and Joseph Stalin, which seems odd because, of course, Stalin will be one of our greatest enemies of the 20th century after World War II. Now, this is what the Axis looked like in 1942. You have Japan in Japan's conquered territory depicted in orange, and, of course, Hitler and Hitler's conquered territory in orange to the west. Now, the most decisive battle of World War II, not on the Pacific, but the most decisive European battle was the Battle of Stalingrad. This took place in the winter of 42 all the way into 43. It was the German army, of course, versus the Russian army. Oops, let me just back up a little bit. Now, Hitler had no business going into Stalingrad. Any military strategist would have told him, there's no reason even to go into Stalingrad. Essentially, Hitler invaded Stalingrad because it was called Stalingrad. And he's like, look, we've got to beat the city that's named after the guy because it'll be like, good for morale, and darn it, I want to beat him. And this was a terrible idea. Many Germans froze to death, starved to death, were just beaten to a pulp. It was very good defensive position for the Russians, and this will literally turn the war around. After this point, Germany will not gain any more territory in Russia, and Russia will basically beeline it for Berlin. Now, while this is going on, we also have the North Africa campaign. This is where General Rommel, the German General Rommel, called the Desert Fox, was pursued by the infamous American General Patton later on. Furthermore, we have the Italian campaign. So this is called Operation Torch, Europe's soft underbelly. So the Allies plan to assault the weakest Axis area, which is certainly North Africa, and then lead right into Italy. So Patton led the American troops to victory here. Germans were trapped in Tunisia, and they had to surrender almost 300,000 troops. This leads us into the battle for Sicily. And here's George C. Scott from the movie Patton, which, yes, you can watch after the AP exam if you'd like to. We get into the Battle of Monte Cassino in February 1944. All right, these are all pretty cool battles and stuff. And eventually the Allies march and liberate Rome by June 5th, 1944. All right. Now, General Eisenhower will give the orders for D-Day. D-Day is, of course, one of the most famous battles of World War II. It's the one in the beginning of Saving Private Ryan, which, yes, Tyler, we can watch that scene a little bit later on in the year. D-Day took place on June 6, 1944, and it was the United States and Great Britain invading, I just totally spaced, sorry, invading Omaha Beach in, I guess that would be northwest France. So this is the Normandy landing. There were paratroopers, people came in on the beaches, and the Germans were very confident because they had the high ground, but they were overtaken by the Western Allied troops. Now, famously, July 20th, which is my husband's birthday, 1944, there was an assassination plot of Hitler orchestrated by German Major Klaus von Stauffenberg. So Stauffenberg and his colleagues planted an explosive device in a suitcase. They were in a meeting. One of them got up and left, and then, set off the explosion. I'll show you a map in just a second. Okay, so the guys in red here, hang on a second, where's my mouse? Okay, this guy, this guy, this guy, and this guy, okay, were all killed. Hitler was right here, and it said that if somebody actually kicked the suitcase over, it was closer to Hitler. Hitler probably would have been killed, but just by happenstance, the briefcase was scooched a bit. So these are all the casualties of this attack and assassination attempt. Stauffenberg and his colleagues were shot as a result of this. They were discovered. Finally, by August 25th, 1944, Paris was liberated by the Western powers, the Allies. Charles de Gaulle, declared triumph and will set up the new Republic of France. These are U.S. troops in Paris. These are French female collaborators in overthrowing the Vichy government, because, everybody got involved. It's good stuff. All right. This is the Battle of the Bulge, which was Hitler's very last offensive in Europe. It lasted from December 16th to January 28th. This is about almost 8 weeks long. And Hitler will not win. Now, finally, by February of 1945, we get to the meeting of Yalta. This is a pretty famous meeting. You can see here depicted Winston Churchill, Franklin Roosevelt on his last legs here, no pun intended, and Joseph Stalin. FDR wants quick Soviet entry into the Pacific War so they can just kind of take it out. FDR and Churchill tell Stalin, look, we need some kind of a buffer, okay, because I'm sorry, FDR and Churchill agree with Stalin that Russia needs a buffer between Germany and Russia to prevent any future aggression. Churchill wants a strong Germany as a buffer against Stalin. Uncle Sam over here, we have the whole Atlantic Ocean, but Great Britain is still on the same continent as totalitarian communist Russia. It's a very famous picture. It's a rumor. It's rumored that in this picture, Stalin is whispering into FDR's ear that he has killed 60 million of his own people, and that's what accounts for this rather surprised look on FDR's face, but it's just a rumor. FDR, his vested interest is in wanting a United Nations that actually has some enforcement power in order to prevent any kind of world war like this again. All right. At the conclusion of the war here, Mussolini and his girlfriend were hung to death. Well, they were killed and hung in Milan in 1945. The Italian people at this point really did not like Mussolini. You could see that very clearly. The U.S. and Russian soldiers here meet at the Elbe on April 25th, 1945, at the conclusion of the war. And this is sort of where people actually start to see what really happened in the Holocaust. The U.S. did not fight the war to get involved with the Holocaust. Nobody really knew about the Holocaust, and what they knew, they didn't really care, to be honest. It's kind of like how the Civil War wasn't really about slavery. World War II is very little to do with the Holocaust. In fact, Great Britain, during their air raids, as well as the U.S., could have easily saved, plenty of people's lives by simply bombing railroad lines to the death camps, but chose not to. So there's that. Actually, let me just jump back to this really quick. Each of these little numbers are locations of concentration camps. You can see most of them are in Poland and in Eastern Europe. Few of them are in Germany. You've scattered ones in Belgium. All the really famous, really icky, scary death camps were in Poland. You can see the famous sign in front of Auschwitz, Arbeit macht frei, work will make you free, which was, of course, a lie. And then this is a photograph of a crematorium where the bodies were burned during the Holocaust. This is a photograph of Elie Wiesel, who I actually saw speak a few years ago, at Buchenwald, which was another concentration camp. And you can see the people are skeleton-type figures. They're eating sawdust and black coffee to survive. This is an example of one of the mass graves at Bergen-Belsen. In fact, another mass grave was recently discovered about 10 years ago just outside of Ukraine. So now Hitler's V-1 rocket his V-1 and V-2 rocket probably would have won him the war. However, if it had been developed earlier, but at this point the Air Force was the Luftwaffe, I should say, was so overtaken by the RAF, and that was due to the RAF's use of radar. Hitler never developed radar, and it gave the British a huge advantage over him. So the developer of these rockets was Werner von Braun, but as it says, it was too little too late. Famously, on April 30th, 1945, Hitler committed suicide in a bunker with his wife that he married a few hours before that, Eva Braun. They took cyanide tablets and died. VE Day, May 8th, 1945, was when Germany surrendered. However, we still have Japan to contend with. Part of this was we talked about, there were a lot of codes used in World War II. You guys are probably familiar that the Navajo people of the United States helped make some of the codes and break some of the codes in World War II, helping us get victory. I'm going to wrap up now, and we'll talk about the next lecture. We'll deal with Japan. Thank you.